Good morning in Montreal. Good evening from Dubai. Elizabeth, you are Executive Secretary of a UN Convention on Biological Diversity. Thank you for joining us today.
Pleasure. Thank you.
So today we are talking about tourism, ecosystem services, and biodiversity. And we know there's a strong symbiotic relationship between sustainable tourism and biodiversity conservation. Now, the issue of the day is COVID-19. And I would like to ask you how you see COVID and the fallout impact these two sectors and this relationship between tourism and biodiversity.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a useful question, particularly this period when we're all suffering with the pandemic and in the lockdown situation. Probably one of the major sector affected by the pandemic has been tourism. And because tourism has been affected, it clearly means there is a connection between tourism and pandemics general, and in this case, particularly COVID-19. The world has seen or is currently facing an unprecedented global health, social, economic emergency as the result of COVID-19. And when I talk of economic emergency, this is where tourism then comes in. And you cannot talk of tourism without thinking of travel. The two are the most affected sectors, with planes on the ground, hotels closed, travel restricted, all in place in virtual all countries around the world. The magnitude of the effect is unmanageable. We know, for instance, the recent OECD report looking at the impacts of COVID-19 on tourism. It is stated 60% of international tourism will be affected by the end of this year. And that this figure will even probably raise to 80% if recovery process is further delayed. So this puts a really scary, gloomy picture, considering the richness of the tourism sector in terms of jobs and therefore livelihood of many people across the board. And you cannot look at tourism without looking at travel, without looking at hotel industry. So imagine all these people now sitting home without jobs. What does it mean? Major, major impact. Not only that, we know many countries, particularly the developing world, bigger part of the national GDP comes from tourism. So with the impact of tourism as the result of pandemic, clearly again shows how bad the situation is. And we know that even with the recovery, tourism sector contributes at least 1 out of 12 jobs, or at least 50% of the GDP of many of the developing countries, particularly small developing countries and least developed countries. So all this will be completely affected without having or clear certainty of where the future will be, because all again depends on tourism, on the economic recovery. What is worrying as the result, as the world now moves towards economic recovery, we know the travel, industrial, and tourism sector will be not just hard hit, but will be fast in terms of looking at issues, measures for quick recovery. And this is maybe worrying, because in that quick recovery of the business sector, of the industrial sector, may lead to further damage if actions are not built into that recovery process of the industry. So this is rather worrying. And this is where we bring back again that connection of not just tourism and health or pandemic, but also tourism, it recovers, because if conservation of nature will not be built in, what will happen to those tourist industries which depend on nature? The national parks, the nature reserves. So these are still needed to be even overprotected at this moment of recovery and ensure they are sustainable, greener, and we all then build back better and not only focus on the economic gains.
So we come from the same part of the world, and we know in Africa we've got some pristine biodiversity, but conservation depends heavily on the revenue from tourism. In South Africa, only 20% of a national park budget comes from government. The rest comes from the private sector and from tourism revenue. How do we look at governments and industry to respond to the slowdown in travel and tourism to make sure we still look after the conservation estate?
I think in terms of recovery, where governments' countries' GDP depends largely on bigger proportion on tourism, governments will have an interest to work closely with the tourist industry so that then together in a collaborative, one cohesive partnership, and this is where the public-private partnership comes in, to really build a new sustainable tourism industry, because the government needs the taxes, needs the revenue. So it's not just for the benefit of private sector, but also the public sector. So, and the situation has reminded us of the connection between the business sector and nature, and each depend on the other. And whoever the stakeholder is, then each stakeholder depends on the contribution and input of the other. So again, this is where, and in our case at the Secretariat with the World Health Organization and other partners, we are talking of one health approach. Bring all sectors together, bring all stakeholders together to deal with these interconnected issues. You cannot separate travel from tourism, tourism from hotels from health, or from development planning. So all these issues are interconnected, and therefore the solution need also to mainstream them and bring all partners on board to deal with this common issue. And this is really common because we have seen with our naked eyes all angles of suffering. And none of us want to go back. So in terms of greener recovery, is also to look at how can we avoid future pandemics through our own industry, if it's tourism, if it's travel, if it's hotels, by building in that green recovery package as a package in the process.
And the massive government stimulus measures across the world and huge flows of financial capital now is opportunity to build back better and to build back greener. I want to conclude by asking you a question about the Free Rio Conventions, because I know you are very focused on synergies and integrated action. And across the Free Rio Conventions, climate change, desertification, and biodiversity, there's also a common narrative. You know, although the division of labor is different, you're all pulling in the same direction. So maybe you can, in conclusion, give us a few highlights from a UN perspective on how you're dealing with this across the environmental sphere.
You are very right. We are talking of Rio Conventions, and of course, outsider may look at the three as if they are three completely separate entities, but it's just the division of labor which has separated us. The issues are intricately connected because the primary drivers of biodiversity loss, as the latest IPBES report has clearly told us, is land use, sea use, is climate change, it's pollution, invasive species, overexploitation of natural resources. And all these have an impact on land, and impact on land has an impact on the tree, on the forest, has an impact on agricultural production, fisheries production, habitat loss. And if biodiversity also provides provides the landscape for climate action, for climate adaptation and mitigation, the forest absorbs the carbon dioxide, the greenhouse gas emissions. So you can see the interconnection, that we cannot separate one from the other. We are seeing the weather patterns, how they are changing. So when we say biodiversity provides the food we eat, but the food we eat comes from where? From the land. And the land needs to be sustainable to produce that good food, without which will lead to land degradation. It gives us also the air we breathe. And this air, this is where we bring in also climate change and all the climatic changes we are seeing. Again, you see the interconnection there. We look at the water. A lot of water, cubic meters of water spent on agricultural production. So overuse of water, and it's water in terms of quantity and quality, not only affecting the soil, but we need the rain. And this is where the climate conditions come in, for the rain to reach the soil. But also we need the water to drink, which again, we depend on that soil, on the biodiversity, on the mountains. So all these issues are really interconnected. It's the way that we deal with them, that the institutions may be different, but the issues are rightly connected. Not surprising that our 3 Rio conventions, we really work in tandem, closely together, because the issues are common and the solutions are also in many cases common. Biodiversity provides solutions for climate change. Taking care of climate provides solution for land degradation, for biodiversity loss, and you can see the mingling of these issues, and each depends on the other. And the totality of all this brings to the tourism sector. Because if these are not sustainable, polluted, then it means the tourist sector will equally be affected.
Elizabeth, thank you so much for spending time with us today. If I take back one message, it is if we address all these challenges in silos, we will fail. If we take hands, unlock the synergies, we have a fighting chance at building back better. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.